I had to re-record this podcast because the winds in Mumbai are so strong that I left the window open and it completely destroyed the sound of my podcast. Okay, so this podcast is just again from the People of the Earth book on the presence of hominins in Europe and Eurasia in the more recent times, the marine isotope stages that we are looking at. We will look at in chapter 5. So this is a table showing post 50,000 before present climate change and archaeological cultures, so goes to about over 50,000 years and generally depicting the colder and warmer periods in the time period being looked at here, coming into the Holocene, which is of course the warmest of this because this is part of the Eemian Ice Age, Eemian Glacial, that started around 135,000 years ago, peaked around 21,000 years ago, and then disappeared. Of course, there were colder periods around 30,000 years ago as well. So looking at Western Europe, Central Europe and Asia, Northeast Asia and the Americas. We will look at the Americas again from both books a little bit later on, and we have looked at chapter 3 for the period before this. So obviously there were Neanderthals both in Western Europe and Central Europe and Asia. So the archaeological cultures are the Mousterian here, with some uncertainty of the beginning of the timing of the Gravettians, which disappeared here, Aurignacian, which disappeared here with some unknown origin as well, Solutrean and Magdalenian. So we'll look at chapter 7 for the more recent civilizations. Here we have East Gravettian starting sometime before 30,000 years ago and then disappearing somewhere around the end of the last glacial maximum. And in Northeast Asia we have Aphantova Gora and Malta and Yuctai with some unknown timings of their beginning and end as well. So we can look at the vegetation types. This is in the Holstein interglacial, whose timing is not very well understood, maybe as recent as 300,000 years ago or maybe as far back as over 400,000 years ago, but it's interesting to compare the interglacial warm period vegetation to a glacial period vegetation changes. So you can see that the distribution in the interglacial here is consisting of alpine grassland, temperate deciduous forest, subtropical forest, boreal forest, temperate mixed forest, forest steppe mosaic, and steppe with tree species that include oak and pine, walnut, hornbeam, elm, fir, and of course as you go into colder temps you get linden, fir, pine and spruce, etc., and the grasslands of the steppe here with forest steppe mosaic and the boreal forests up here as well. Okay, alpine grassland is present here, but if you look at the cold times during the Upper Pleistocene glaciation, which is a generic term in terms of timing, but the Scandinavian ice sheet all the way down here and the Alpine ice sheet is present in the mountains, and you can see the vegetation changes. Here you have tundra, park tundra and mountain vegetation occupying large chunks, and boreal forest, the Mediterranean vegetation, chiefly coniferous, is been pushed down further, and Mediterranean vegetation, chiefly of dry steppe type, is found here. So we will see later on that, or at least briefly mention, that the greening of Sahara much later on also probably required winter precipitation over the Mediterranean region. So you can see the relation happening here across the Mediterranean into North Africa. But of course you have glacier ice and larger occupation by the steppe and prairie long grass and boreal forest confined to little pieces here, and temperate mixed forest, chiefly broad leaf appearing over the interfaces between the Mediterranean vegetation and the steppe. And of course there are also many refugia that would have been created along these. So the inventions, in terms of the inventions in Europe, Central Europe and Asia, there was a so-called Swiss Army knife effect. So you one tool that can cover many situations were derived by taking the core and then creating the first blades that then allowed various architectures of backed blade burin scrapers, and also working with antlers and bones, so reindeer antlers being used to make groove and splinter technique, and antler and bone tools, and composite specialized weapons with the detachable foreshaft and spear. These are critical because when you want to hunt a big animal, you cannot get too close, but if you have things that detach and shoot off, or it can obviously help, and cooperation and chiefdoms and so on would have come out of these as well. For example, if you catch big game and you cannot consume all of it, you can invite other tribes or neighbors to come share it. Then you get tributary power. So with militarization and chiefdom, power games would have been on, but also needle may have would have evolved and leading to tailored clothes, and fire was mastered, so cooking of the material was possible as well, which we'll see here. So outline of the late Ice Age traditions of Western Europe. The most commonly accepted scheme has two parallel cultural traditions: the Gravettian, characterized by back knives, and the Aurignacian, favoring scrapers and sharpened blades. The Gravettian, with increasingly finer back knives, became dominant after 30,000 years ago. Thereafter, there was considerable regional variations reflected in different tool traditions. The Solutrean, a culture that relied on sophisticated cooking of large pieces of flint so that they became porcelain-like in texture, flourished in France and Spain. The stoneworker could exert pressure on flake edge to produce magnificent leaf-shaped spear points. Many variations of the Gravettian culture are found in Central and Eastern Europe. In the West, the Magdalenian tradition, which relied heavily on antler and bone, emerged about 18,000 years ago. By then, the last glacial was already ending. So looking at the time scales from 45,000 to the Holocene, we went through colder and temperate times coming into temperate times of the Holocene, and the cultures we have looked at: arrival of Homo sapiens in Musterian before 50,000 years ago, Gravettian with unknown time of beginning and end, but there is evidence over this period. Similarly, Aurignacian, Solutrean, Magdalenian, and of course coming into Mesolithic cultures of the Holocene. We will look at other civilizations as well along the way. So in terms of characteristics, there was Middle Paleolithic technology already present, and then you had Venus figurines and cave art, gradual elaboration of stone and bone technology, Aurignacian sharpened and etched woodwork tools, Gravettian backed stone knife blades, and so on. Bas relief sculpture began to occur, magnificent pressure flaked stone spearheads, apogee of cave and antler art by the end of the Ice Age around 12,000 years ago. We had the Younger Dryas, which had created a hiccup with the refreezing, but skillful bone and antler work, and then finally transitioning into agricultural lifestyle mixed with hunting gathering. Forest and coastal adaptations happened because probably the animals that were hunted were already hunted down to extinction, or at least very scarce resources in terms of hunting and gathering. We will discuss again whether agriculture was made necessary after 10,000 years, or it was tried before the Younger Dryas and couldn't be sustained because of large variations in climate. To summarize, this chapter documents the spread of Homo sapiens into Europe and Eurasia from Africa and Southwest Asia between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago during the late Ice Age. So this is a bit of a conundrum that Southwest Asia and other parts of Asia got colonized before Europe and Eurasia, but we will talk about the Denisovan, which was found in Georgia, and push the timeline back. Temporary colonization of southwestern Asia by anatomically modern humans occurred around 120,000 to 100,000 years ago from northeast Africa. Modern humans dispersed permanently into southwestern Asia by about 50,000 years ago. They brought with them refined and sophisticated hunting methods and tool technologies. Small number of moderns settled in Eastern and Central Europe and apparently in the West as early as 40,000 years ago during a period of somewhat warmer conditions before the refreezing happened around 30,000 years ago. A massive eruption of in the Bay of Naples area in Italy around 39,000 years ago may have temporarily decimated these earliest anatomically modern human populations. A more permanent presence of anatomically modern humans in Europe took hold with the appearance of the Aurignacian culture after the eruption about 39,000 years ago. Eventually, Aurignacians settled in all parts of what is now Europe south of the ice sheets. What happened to the Neanderthals in Western Asia and Europe is still a matter of heated debate. We will discuss this again. Some researchers argue that they were wholly replaced by Homo sapiens, others that they wholly interbred. But the genetic evidence suggests that there was limited interbreeding. The reasons for their demise remain unclear, with some suggesting they were wiped out by the anatomically modern humans and others preferring environmental changes as an explanation, perhaps including the effects of the Mount Toba eruption around 75,000 years ago. We will visit this again in terms of survival of hominins on the Indian subcontinent, but the timing of the Mount Toba eruption and Neanderthal disappearance may not necessarily match either. Anatomically modern humans responded to the sheer diversity of the late Ice Age environment with great flexibility. They developed more complex societies and elaborate bone and antler technology, as well as a complex symbolic life reflected in intricate artistic traditions. This is well represented in the Magdalenian culture, which flourished about 18,000 years before present for about 5,000 years. So this went from the last glacial maximum into the transition to Holocene. And this idea of great flexibility we will discuss again in the last chapter in terms of modern human response to climate change happening now. Whether we have become much less adaptable, thinking we will always find our way with technology and so on. So whether that's an advantage or disadvantage, especially when considered with behavioral evolution and cognitive abilities and abilities to innovate and so on are considered. Anatomically modern human European Cro-Magnon art traditions developed before 30,000 years ago and involved engraving, drawing, painting and sculpture, as well as the adornment of portable objects. The motives behind the art are much debated. Some of the cave art may be connected with shamanistic activity and initiation ceremonies. Many of you may know what shamanism is. Basically, those are the special people who are supposedly able to communicate with the other world, with spirits, and go into a trance and translate your message to whoever may have disappeared before you and so on. So it's not so much religious but organized religion, but a kind of a connection to the spiritual world. The Mycenaean cultural complex of Eastern Europe and Eurasia was based on the exploitation of open plains and steppe. The many groups with this complex spread slowly eastward from the Czech Republic of the present day onto the Russian plains of the present day, relying heavily on game of all kinds. Far to the northeast, western Siberia was settled at least as early as 30,000 years ago, but the extreme northeast was devoid of human settlement until the very late Ice Age, perhaps as late as 15,000 before present. So we'll go to Georgia and visit the Denisovan caves again to come back to this point. Most experts agree that the northeastern Siberia was the stepping off for the first settlement of the Americas. From there, humans first crossed the Bering Land Bridge into Alaska either during the late Ice Age or when the global warming began around about 16,000 years ago. So this timelines of peopling of Americas is still also a little bit of an open question, and the pathway they may have taken, whether it was coastal away from the ice sheets on North America, or there was a gap between the Laurentide ice sheet and the little ice sheet to the west, and so on. So we'll revisit that again elsewhere. So the sound should be fine in this podcast. I'll check and make sure. Okay.